yeah, as I say, welcome and thank you very much. And if I forget to mention it later, please join us for refreshments after the talk. We will give Kneo and Kopano about 30-35 minutes to have a conversation, and then we hope that you will join in and participate in the conversation as well, and finish around 6, just after 6. And then there are refreshments at the back. Nelson Mandela is dead. That was the title through which I first became aware of this exhibition. What a provocation, I thought. And then I started to dig deeper to try and understand this exhibition. And I was further provoked by the idea of the person is in the people. Nelson Mandela is in the people. What of him do I see in me? What of him do I not want to see in me? What of him do I see in people around me? What of him do I not see in people around me? And then Kneo Mokgopa asks me, what does it mean to try and read the world through the absence of Nelson Mandela? And I ask, what does it mean to see the world in the absence of others who I may think of as saviors? In his curatorial notes, Kneo Mokgopa continues to challenge me. The question, he says, is really, what does it mean to be a person in South Africa right now? What histories are available to interpret this moment? The history we here at the museum chose to work with throughout this year is the last 30 years of democracy. And the challenge with that history, like the challenge with Nelson Mandela, is not to be seduced by easy or cliched questions about ideals or what could or should have been. The challenge is to face the complexity, to interrogate the more nuanced difficulties of this history at this moment, to ask questions and make the statements that provoke us and force us to think again. That is what this exhibition, The Person is in the People, forced me to do, to think again of the person I am and the people who make me a person. So thank you, Kneo, for the provocative question you ask in this exhibition to help us think through 30 years of democracy and through other histories. And thank you, Kopano, for your work at the Department of Psychology and at the Center for Critical and Creative Thought, where I know you are also thinking with Kneo and with others. Thank you both for this conversation.
Thank you, Mariki. I would like to thank you again for being here. My name is Kopano, Ratele, and I am housed in a building across the road, the Krotua building, which used to be called Wilcox for a long time. I'm also a member of the Center for Critical and Creative Thought. I wonder, before I get into this, to tell the story of how I met Kneo. Can I do it?
Sure.
I've told this in private. So Kneo was a student at UCT at that time.
I'm sorry.
At UCT. And you will see the connection with the creative bits that a psychologist is trying to do, which is a little unusual, I suppose, I think. So I'm walking around Stellenbosch, and I come across a magazine with a cover. The cover has a black woman with the breast of a comb flowers, and then she has quite a striking image. So, as one is wont to do, I search who made this magazine. It's a RAG magazine, R-A-G, Richard Give for UCT. I eventually am led to Kneo. And that's the first thing. And I thought, oh, okay, all right, this is great. So let's hear what the biography which we'll introduce. I find that this person is not an artist, but is an artist. He's a law student. It was like amazing. A law student who does art. I was wonderfully, beautifully surprised by this. And then, was it the first meeting or a subsequent meeting? I tell you what I wanted to do for the work I was doing then, which was a photographic work on masculinities. We eventually did that, but Kneo is late. I'm sitting at the backstand and drinking coffee after coffee, but she brings me flowers. That was amusing. I've never had a young man bring me flowers before. That was a beautiful thing. This is how I get to learn about Kneo and the interest that brings us here. And then later on, I learned that you've gone to Nelson Mandela Foundation. So Kneo is now joined me in another capacity as a fellow associate of our center, and we'll do another magazine. We're going to do another magazine. Magazines are great about black thought, thinking from black. So I'd like, for people who don't know you, just to introduce yourself before you get to the project.
Sure.
You want to do that?
Yes. Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. What am I? I am a writer. I think at the core of me, I think I'm a writer. I think that's where a lot of my thinking begins. And I'm also an artist and a researcher. I've worked for I think my first like proper income tax job was at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and I was first started doing communications, and then I moved into narrative work, which is things like this exhibition, and that's where the kind of genesis came from. But I'm interested in a lot of things, and I sometimes struggle to find home, and I think especially in academia, I've often really struggled to find a discipline or a department that will, capture a lot of these eclectic, diverse thoughts, somewhat centered around being, around identity, and around place, I think, to place and time. Those are my interests, and I think I'm really, really fascinated by, what's the word now? The ways in which we create these absent spaces, these non-beings. I call it the un-there, and I've written about it in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of histories and otherwise. But you know what I mean? So maybe thinking about blackness, right? So if we think about blackness as a human being who has been told they are not human, well, that's terrible. But it's also fascinating in many ways. What does that being do? How do they feel about themselves? How do they exist? How do they, you know what I mean? So yeah, those kinds of liminal spaces, those caverns, I guess, the cracks, I think some writers write about it. That's what I'm interested in.
Thanks, Kneo. So to get on to the project, I invite you to think with us, help us think about what's behind this project. I'm interested as much in the figure of Nelson Mandela. As much as, or perhaps especially interested in these other things that go with this exhibition. So could you talk about the project, how it came into being, but also these additions that you have put in here, like the tin mugs in particular, and then the other pieces.
So the project came about from the Nelson Mandela Foundation wanting to commemorate that, how many years? I think it was 10 years since Nelson Mandela's been gone, 2023.
Yes.
It's been a decade since he's been gone, and we were trying to think about what does that mean? How do we kind of move through this? And of course, there are ways of celebrating, commemorating. You could, remember specific achievements. We can go in the time capsule otherwise. But I thought, I think there was a different kind of question to be asked, and I think it was specifically about the absence. And I think that's this question of his absence is a relevant one. So then the question became, well, what does it mean? And I think I think in some ways I posed it in some of the most unfair ways that I could have posed it, which is, what does it mean that Nelson Mandela is dead? And I think it was intentionally provocative, and I think in some ways it tries to raise the stakes of the inquiry, of the conversation. It tries to really grab you by the lapel, and kind of hold you up against the wall and say, tell me, what does it mean, but also, look, this is something happening here, this is something worth engaging in. And I think in some ways it does that. And this idea of absence was really fascinating for me. So I took a medium, perspex, which is a clear medium, or completely clear but transparent enough. And on the medium, I'm etching. And to etch is really to scratch and to remove bits of material. And so I have this transparent material that I'm removing material from. And by removing that material, producing then the image or the visage of Nelson Mandela. And I found that interesting, this kind of, he exists specifically in his absence, and I think that was a big reflection, right? This idea that, well, his deadness is debatable, and what do you mean by him? And so all of these other questions are sparked. I think the other thing that I wanted to explore was this idea of trying to look at Mandela and not being able to see him. Because sometimes it's really hard when you're standing in front of it and you can't quite see what you're looking at. And instead you're seeing people on the other side of the work. And I think there's a nice transference there, this idea of you're trying to look at Mandela but you're seeing each other. I think the cups were also interesting, and I think moreover there's a sparseness to this, not sparseness, but there's like a coldness, I feel, in the materials, in these hard plastic, and then this aluminum tin, being used. So not very soft, palatable, kinds of materials. And yeah, I think I found that interesting as well, in kind of the absence of warmth and otherwise. But the cups themselves were a reflection on a couple of things. I wanted the cups to be a space to use a very millennial term, to manifest, to hope, to having thought then what it really means to be a person in this country right now. And I think when we know what it means to be a person in this country right now, it means to be facing lots of precarity, lots of vulnerability. Just, what is it now, the 2021 unrest, I think, was a significant moment of rupture, and I think it has a lot to say about the fabric of our country. And I think we keep seeing rupture, we keep seeing unstable connections, unstable identitarian notions, and otherwise. There's something that's not working, the national question, who belongs here? What does a South African look like? And all those kinds of inquiries. So I wanted to bring those to the front. But once you confront that, I wanted there to be space to say, well, I want something different, and I want something more, and I feel something more, and I wanted kind of an exuberance, a kind of militant, almost a militant wanting, desiring a space for that. And that's what the cups are. It's a practice of waking up in the morning and holding a mug of coffee in both hands, and you whisper, hey ma, today Kopano mustn't stress me out, eh? And you take a sip, and you know what I mean, and you whisper your hopes, hey, I miss my mama, which is okay, you know what I mean, and you think about your life. It's a very intimate, personal, private little moment, but it's also a powerful moment. It kind of really what's the word, situates you in that day, situates you in that moment, in that life, in other words. So I think it can be a powerful moment, a kind of constant reifying ritual, and that was the hope of the cups. Initially, there were in other spaces. The invitation was to whisper that freedom, that unbridled, complete, utter freedom, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it means. But I think we've since taken that down for us to let them live as well, and for us to appreciate them as well.
I don't know who grew up with these masks, but these are also a certain kind of home at these masks. Of course, they become fashionable in some. When you travel around the country, there's a particular kind of coffee shop that might have them in like peri-urban and rural Western Cape, but also in Johannesburg in some places. But some people remember this as the cups where you had coffee in the morning. And I'm wondering whether this gesture towards home as well. What are you saying about it?
I think a lot of it was also, so yes, maybe more broadly in my artistic practice, I love this medium so much, especially the bowls, the flat bowls, and the plates, and this whole, the artistic tradition of painting in bowls and plates. I'm really fascinated by that, and it's exactly what you're describing. There's a power in those bowls, in this material. It was used in so many of the most kind of profound moments at weddings, you know what I mean, when there's a ceremony taking place and there's a slaughtering, the bowls would carry the blood, that sacrificial blood, and it was sacred. Or when there's a wedding, they'll use it to look, the large basins, they'll use it for cookies and scones, and they'll just a mass of them of scones, moving around. And so it's loaded in South Africanness, and I think, there's a kind of potent history, and multiple histories, and personal histories, and I think then to have those as being the vehicle, the vessel to whispering hope and freedom into, I thought was quite something.
One last question about this, some of the items here. So is there a difference between what the people in Braamfontein and Wits wrote and Stellenbosch on those times? And second, can you pick out one or two that were more striking for you, or poignant or interesting?
So I should probably contextualize them as well, but so we put up these pins asking the question, what does it mean that Nelson Mandela is dead? We put one up here in Stellenbosch, I think it was by, I forget the name of this building. Jan Vertoon, thank you. And we put another one up in Braamfontein. We had multiple other locations we wanted to go to, but realistically, budget and time. So we put another one up in Braamfontein, which is in Johannesburg. It's one of the largest student complexes in the southern hemisphere. Wits is close by, UJ is close by, there's a bunch of colleges close by as well. So we put it up near the commune and to receive the same. And the responses have been fascinating. I think even from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, anticipation was they're going to just call him a sellout and just tear him apart and rubbish him, because that was what I want to say in vogue, especially during Visma's fall, kind of taking these radical anti-establishment positions, and burn Nelson Mandela down and rubbish him in that kind of way, and I was aware of that as well. But the response that we got, I think, really demonstrated that young people don't have simplistic notions of Nelson Mandela, are not just carried on by bandwagons. I think they have multiple, diverse views and understandings of the thing that Nelson Mandela is, beyond the person, but the historical, political resource that he is. And I think they recognize that, especially in Stellenbosch, right? There was one comment that he has turned into an idea, and I found that interesting. But also, lots of kind of philosophical thinking about Nelson Mandela, lots of Bible verses. There's one, John 3:16. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that's the verse where Jesus is, so Jesus is the comparison, but Jesus is, he's leaving his disciples, and he says, I must leave you, because if I don't leave you, the Savior will not come, So it's kind of very profound idea that him leaving, him dying, was prophetic, what I mean? It's kind of wrapping South African history and his presence in those kinds of ways. Braamfontein was also interesting. What I found is that Braamfontein, they weren't as engaged, and I think there could be multiple reasons. Number one, the space that it was in was kind of an interim space where there's lots of movement and otherwise in a very public space. And so maybe people didn't feel comfortable to stand for too long and write in the middle of Johannesburg, But I think there is something to be said that young people in Stellenbosch in particular are engaging so vibrantly with these ideas. What I want to say is, sometimes people think that young people call Nelson Mandela a sellout and dismiss him. And there's lots of dismissal of the very question. There's one response that says "bot," B-H-O-D, and it's just a way of saying bored, like, you know. And I think that's relevant as well. This kind of, you know, and I like to kind of think of it as the kind of theme of thinking as we've set up this human being as the savior. And I look at my life now, and I don't feel saved. The education crisis, the unemployment crisis, especially for young people, you know, and all of these other crises, you can name them and go on about them. And I think it's hard for young people to reconcile the idea of the savior with the conditions of their lives. And I think that's what they're wrestling with in some of these responses, where they're saying, he was useful, thank you, I need to go somewhere else now. And I think that's almost the gist of what people are saying.
I'm going to widen the conversation a little bit and speak and ask Kneo about something that's been in my head about, so not just Mandela's death, qua Mandela, right? So the question about his death is also the question about fathers, about paternal figures, about symbolic figures, symbolic fathers, about political fathers. So it's about the death of a father, in fact, their big father. So on the political front, Kneo has already mentioned part of this. And my interpretation joins yours in one way. Given the results of the elections, May 29, we can interpret the support given to the MK party and the father of that party as indicative of a fantasy of paternal love, right? That he's going to come back and save us again. But also 2021 events that you referred to. So there is, one would say, a sense that that father, the MK father, could solve all problems that you just mentioned. High education, poverty, economic liberation, I think but generally will make us happy. That the father will come back, will make us happy. You can imagine, and this is a big narrative in some movies, a child is sitting at the corner waiting for the father to come at Christmas or birthday or return home, and you are imagining, you're fantasizing that when they return, or if they were here, things will be all right, that we will be happy. Certainly that I will be happy, forget the partner. So I'd like you to say something about the fantasy of the father. Because even while he was alive, there's that fantasy that, you know, and it makes grown-ups give up this responsibility to be grown-ups. Right?
Oh.
If you have and the big father, of course, could be a god of some kind, that they will have answers. So especially about the political father in relation to the fantasy of the fathers, but going then beyond that to other kinds of fathers and paternal figures. Could you say something about this idea that we will be saved by the father? If he was alive, Mandela was alive, things would be better. Or if this new father, the MK, comes back, is back, will be saved. What are your thoughts about this?
So I want to start by really enjoying this idea of the fantasy of the father. That's a lovely phrase. And I think it speaks to a lot of things. I think what it evokes in me is there's a paper by Bauhaus, I think it's The Will to Love, if I'm not mistaken. In one of the opening chapters, paragraphs, and otherwise, she describes feminism and being a feminist in feminist spaces who still believe large scale kind of way. And how difficult that space was for her, you know, how she was pushed out, she was called things like sleeping with the enemy, which was profound, I think, in a literal sense, is how she was being accused of it, and really being squeezed out, right? And in some ways, kind of navigating, exploring those ideas and that experience, she says, yes, we've, and maybe to use a contemporary phrase, we've used phrases like men are trash. But the reality is we want men's love. We want it so deeply. And what she says is that the desire for that love and the impossibility of that love rends us, and I really, you know, rends us. And I think that's a lot to do with this idea that you're bringing forward, this idea of the Father. And I think to see through my own eyes, it's a painful thing to think about. I don't mean to kind of go into like my own intimate father, but when I think about fatherness in South Africa, it's the grand narrative, it's not a pretty one. And I find it fascinating because there are so many good men, you know what I mean? There are wonderful fathers, and I've seen so many examples of them. But the big narrative, especially for people in my generation, is that fathers have just never done it. You know, they were even so. Yes, of course they leave, and I think this thing of men leaving, fathers leaving, is a big hallmark of fatherness in South Africa. I think, and I think that's how a lot of people experience fatherness. But even when they stay, they leave in other ways. They can be absent whilst present. I'm not sure how to describe this, but uninvolved in their children's lives, uninterested in asking them questions, or you know, wanting to fulfill particular responsibilities and quite squared in other ways, you know. And so there's always this big gaping wound in South African culture for the father, to use a really problematic term, the real father who's going to actually father, you know what I mean? And I think that desire is huge, and I think it's brimming, you know. And I think that I like these two fathers that you're asking us to consider, and I think there's many ways of thinking about the differences between Mandela and Zuma, and that's a different kind of conversation. But for this, I want to say politically, I think in many ways Nelson Mandela has come to represent the establishment, where he was the president, he had the power, he represented the state, he, you know what I mean, is our big representative, icon, symbolic reference point. He embodies the, maybe we say the hope of nationness even in South Africa. And so he's he's put up as that father. And then we reconcile that idea with the kinds of betrayal that people have felt from the state, you know? And I don't want to enumerate them, but people feel betrayed by the state, people feel betrayed by the system. And in those kinds of conditions, anti-establishment heroes become very, very attractive. Heroes like Jacob Zuma, who says that they did all of that to you. And I think, sorry, I'm a little bit of a chat about Jacob Zuma, but because he also appeals to a Zulu fatherness, and he's very clear about that, right? There was a moment during the party where Jacob Zuma was deployed into KwaZulu-Natal to represent or to kind of gather up KwaZulu-Natal voters for the ANC, to say that I have Zuluness, or the ANC has a strong Zulu representation, and you can believe in this Zuluness, right? And he's used that, and he continues to use it, but he fashions Zuluness as this kind of, this kingdom that was lost, this wronged, you know, perpetual victimness, this kind of, we'll get them next time, you know what I mean? That's, he wants to kind of fashion Zuluness. But he also wants to be the most authentic of it, and he keeps drawing on historical injuries, you know, lost battles, you know what I mean, kingdoms, you know, and otherwise. And he keeps saying, this new establishment has been, what's the word? Conspiring, has been conspiring with that wound that we all suffered, you know? And so he presents himself as the best father, really, you know, who's really going to take on the establishment, who's going to repair these wounds, not only in the short term in terms of I need a house, I need water, I need electricity, I need Wi-Fi, but it was going to really, establish people again in the ways that he feels that many people have been wronged. And I want to use the word epistemically wronged.
We have to take this and write it as part of the artist statement right now. You started with Bell Hooks, you end up with Jacob Zuma. That's fantastic. That's really amazing. So, in a sentence, and I am really collapsing what we've said in one sentence. It feels as if in this work, if you connect it with the politics in which we find ourselves, we still have to get to a realistic relationship with our fathers. Yes?
Absolutely. And that was just such a clever way of saying it. Especially fathers like Nelson Mandela, confronting that reality that he's gone, that vacuum, that absence, but also what it means to be the person without that father. Yeah. This is language.
Okay. I think I'm sensing that, I want to open this, but I'm going to ask, just go back and ask a question. I'm going to leave the history and memory, we might go back to that. I'm going to leave others. I want to talk about the person. When you started, you already referenced and made a suggestion to this idea. So let's go back to being, to the person, to and its relationship to time. And Mareki, in introducing this, mentioned this. The question in the write-up, in the publicity poster is, what does it mean to be a person in South Africa right now? So you can read this in different ways, right? You can say, what does it mean to be a person now after Mandela's death? So now that we have freedom, you can read it that way. You can read it as, what does it mean to be a person when, as they say in French, but in English, as things change, they stay the same. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And I want to hear how you read this idea of a person, particularly as it relates to the suggestion in the new title, the person is in the people. Now that gestures in my mind about how, at least in certain cultures in South Africa, we're more inclined to think of what other cultures call collective self, right? The person is in the people rather than a more individualistic self. But I'm interested really, even though my discipline I was trained in, tends to think of itself as the authority in the person. And I find that, we don't, and as a law person, you think about the person in different. So what is this person you're talking about? What does it mean to be a person today? Is it different? Has it changed? How would it change? How would it change to be a person that even the Constitution talks about that? It starts with the human dignity in one part of it. In one sense, what is it to be a human, but also this person? And how to be a person now? I mean, you were referencing this, one last sentence, you're referencing this. So the moment of decolonization, I remember Komani, Chumani, Mkoele, how do you say?
I'm not entirely sure.
What he was saying was precisely that we live with shit, basically, right? Mm-hmm. That we're not persons, we're not human. And then the moment of decolonization, of course, started drawing from a lot of people around the world about how we think about the human, about the person. Sylvia Winter, long-term Fanon, and a whole lot of people. That some people up to that point, even up to that point, were still thought of as subhuman, as not quite persons in the sense that a liberal democratic framework might think about it. That we're not quite there yet. So your thoughts about this idea of the person person in the people, and maybe a disciplinary answer, or not.
Sure. I don't think I can keep myself from giving a little bit of a disciplinary answer. In law, person is not something that you're necessarily born with directly, or historically it hasn't always been that way. Companies can be persons, legal personalities, and they can have all the rights, and it just means, you know what I mean, to be able to represent yourself in court.
And they can have more rights than human.
They can have more
people
rights than
by
human
people.
people.
Property, like this idea of property as a right, as it were. Property rights, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you think about the ways that it's also been stripped away from natural human beings. I remember, for instance, so many examples, sorry. There was the Wookie case, just very briefly. The Wookie case was a case of this woman who wanted to become a lawyer. And so she went and she got a law degree, and like any other lawyer, and she applied to the bar to become a lawyer, and the bar said, no, you will not become a lawyer. She said, why? The legislation says any person that has obtained a law degree may, present themselves to the bar to become, I forget the exact language. And they went to court for it, and in court they ended up saying, the judiciary could not have meant women when they said person. They could not have meant women, right? And which is, again, right? Being a person is not secured. Power always has a way of intervening in your personness. But I also think that people also navigate personness in very profound ways, right? I want to say it as arranging presence and absence as tools. I want to say playing the fool sometimes in the face of power. I want to say double up or shortcut. Shortcut. Double up. I'm sort of going all the way around the city, but taking the shortcut through the graveyard, you know what I mean? There are these tools, these tactics, these banditries that, especially people who have been declared to be unhuman, who've been dehumanized, they can employ, they can deploy, they can become invisible, they can stand in such a still way that you can forget they're there, I think about Sizwe Banzi's Dead, which is one of the original references in the original title, Nelson Mandela is Dead. And in it, Sizwe Banzi needs a job. He doesn't have the right permits to work in that area during apartheid. He finds a body on the floor. Someone has died, and the body is on the floor. Robert's Williams. He goes through the body and finds a passbook, and in that passbook are all of the permits he needs to work where he wants to work. So he takes that identity, right? But there's this kind of narrative that kind of resonates with Nelson Mandela as well, kind of being born Kholehlasha, and that being not person enough for the kind of world he was trying to enter. But this name is, he gets given a name, and I find it really fascinating. But he has more personhood in that reality with that new name, especially when you recognize how personhood is a powerful thing, or rather by powerful I mean it's a tool of power, and it can be stripped away. I could talk about this forever.
Okay, so shall we open it up and have your observations, questions, comments, and you don't have to direct it only to him, of course, but he's here to answer. Please, we have a hand up here, if we can.
I like to comment on the way you curated this exhibition. I enjoy very much the metaphor of the cup. It shows us how much quiet reflection is needed before we start our busy day. And the second thing is, I was wondering in the beginning why it made it so difficult for us to read from the comments. And then I thought, this is exactly what is necessary. We have to look very carefully, or to find out very carefully what other people in this country think. It is important for us that it is difficult, I think, because it is too easy to say, well, this and that, we know it already. And I think the metaphor of the purpix which you used, I saw it on that monitor somewhere, we have to scratch the surface. And that again I think is very important, that we try to see through what somebody thinks. And coming back to the cups, they all have got the same shape, but the colors are slightly different. So all of us have to work on this. And one comment on one of the perspectives was, this country belongs to all of us. And that again I think is a very important message. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll take you and then go to the back here.
Alright, thank you. The chat has been very lively. I think as a student myself at Stellenbosch, I think one of the things that resonates with me is that nobody's coming to save us. And here's how this is very important, I think, is that throughout the election season, we had a lot of political party leaders show up here. And they all came and they told us, of course, their manifestos and how they were going to benefit us as students and all of that. And the one thing that I think the response students were giving to them, myself included, was, we can't trust you to save us because Mandela's not here, so nobody's going to save us unless if we, young people, decide we want to be saved. Only we can give us that saving, we can provide that saving to us. So I think my question to you is, when you hear the term, nobody's coming to save us, and you look at the state of the country, and just how much young people know, but also just how unaware they are of what they know, how do you maneuver that? How do you curate that? And how do you shape an exhibition and a language that young people can understand, that resonates with them, and that shows them that yes, is not here to save us, nobody's coming to save us, but we are able to create that saving that we need for ourselves.
Thank you. I think in some of the spirit of the statement, no one's coming to save us, I didn't necessarily see myself having that kind of role even, as trying to impart that to young people. I think I wanted to know what young people thought. Yeah, I'm still young, I'm as a young person myself. I was interested in the usness of it all, and what kinds of conversations we like to have, the kinds of conversations I've had with my friends about these big historical figures and these moments and whatnot. And so I really wanted to hear. I didn't really want to speak at, you know what I mean? And I think it's kind of reflected now where other people's intentions, voices, perspectives are framed as part of the exhibition, which is kind of a collaborative thing more than anything, I think.
Hi, Mrs. Thank you so much for putting together this exhibition and just having this kind of conversation. And I just want to sort of give a comment on what my interpretation was of the cups, and love your interpretation. And I think I just went beyond that to say, the cups are hanging in singular form here, and for me it represented each individual South African. But these bands also make noise, right? If we knock it against something, even if I take one of the strings and pull it, it will make a noise against the other cups. And for me, that really reflected what you said at the beginning about time here, was that we are in a state of precarity, and there are these educational disruptions, crises that we are in, housing crises, so on and so forth, and how social movements happen is through this disruption, is through making noise. And these cups make noise, and I think that that was symbolic to me as well. That it's not just individuals, not just here individually, but it's also as a collective, all these cups as well. So I just wanted to share that as well.
Thank you. I never thought about. I mean, I played around with them and flicked them and plucked them and whatnot. But thank you for that interpretation. You should have answered that question.
Thanks. Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ornella, and I'm in my second year in PhD humanities. Just want to say thank you for this beautiful evening because I'm learning so much. I just wanted to ask and also comment on what you said about fatherhood. As we see the icon Nelson Mandela, who was very much a hero to the nation, and ever since 2013, he was no longer here, we miss him. And coming to like the figure of a father, when I look at my own life as a student and leaving home in the Western Cape Town, traveling to Stellenbosch to study. And at this place, I'm alone. I have no one as family, and I live my life as a student up and down. My parents do not know what is happening around me here in Stellenbosch. But coming to this space, different culture, exposed to new people that I do not know, one thing I always carry is the voice of my father. And what he told me when I'm home, what he actually taught us as his children. So when I come to Stellenbosch, if I choose to change his voice, I'm talking about a positive voice, not a negative one. So Mandela had this positive voice that he instilled into the minds of those who were not born at the time. When they actually were born, they found the legacy that he left. So if I chose to change the voice that the positive voice that my father actually instilled into me, I know that something is, I'm going to adapt to a new change, which is, I'm trying to refer to South Africans, us not actually carrying on the voice of Mandela, what he instilled into us. People are actually adopting into new cultures, adopting into new voices from the outside world, talking about the Western world. And you referred to Zuma. Zuma was also part of the ANC, which was very much Mandela's political party. So why has Zuma been a different type of person, not the hero that we all wanted, since we were all born in the same political party? And you also mentioned about people being betrayed. Why is that happening? Did we lose the voice? Or is it still there because we're speaking about the person as even people? Are the people carrying this person still, or are people actually compromising in this generation?
Thanks for that, Juman. Sure, respond.
In terms of Jacob Zuma, I want to be very honest, and that's such a philosophical question. Why is Jacob Zuma? I could never, he's a product of the same institution in many ways as Nelson Mandela, but I don't know. Please remember the second part of the question. I was so stuck in that first part. It was
The voice.
Oh yes. I think it's a matter of, it's not so much, I feel, a moral question even, but I think it's a matter of time. I think there are heroes that Nelson and many other figures that Nelson Mandela looked up to that we've forgotten today, but speak through Mandela. And I think that it's important that we have our own voices that we have taken from Mandela, but you know what I mean, that we're carrying forward. I think what I would hate is a reality where there are no new figures, there are no new activists, there are no new, pioneers. There's no one else to look at. All we have is the past. And as much as it's really important to preserve the past, as I'm really clearly interested in, but at the same time, let's give ourselves space to create freedom in our own name as well.
Can I venture, before, please give it to her, but can I venture some things now? I'm in in uncharted territories, so I haven't said this in public, but I have a small book called My Father, My Stranger, A Father, a Stranger, by a colleague of mine. So Jacob Zuma is interviewed in that book about being a father. You might get it in some bookshops. One of the things that's always struck me about Jacob Zuma in particular is his relationship to his father, the absent father. But it's not been written enough about this. So he had to, as it were, father himself, right? And the ANC became the father in that. But as I said, this is uncharted territory, and it might not be cool. So Jacob Zuma seems to be always in a struggle to overcome this absence of having to father himself. I remember he dropped out quite early, in fact, very early in school, right? From school.
Yeah.
But there's that big hole there of having to find other fathers. And I guess if there are psychoanalysts in the room, that his own relationship with his children, when he's speaking about the father, is a replay of this unresolved absence. So that's the one part about. What I really liked about your question or a comment is this idea of the voice of my father, of the father. This is a really profound thing in the sense that, and this is where I differ with you, that you can't escape, but in two senses, you can't escape the voices of tradition, right? Even if you are hyper-modern, so you are always, you have these voices, and they could be the voice of the father immediately, but of course the voice of other kinds of traditions. So you have to interact with them. You can never not interact with the voices from the past, including even when the people are absent. So you create this fantasy, you do that.
Sure.
So that's one bit that you can't. And the second, this idea of the father, Mandela as a father, it plays into something that I don't like myself, but actually it exists. This archetypal figures we have. Mother is one, is a big one, and the father is another one. So we always need the fathers, even if they're absent. We have an archetypal father in our life, and we have to negotiate, as it were, with the father. Even if they're dead, if they're not present, you have to create them. So I'm afraid we will not get out of, as humans, at least as far as I know, this idea, we will create a God, as it were.
Yes,
But also a father, literally father. You have to create a father who will give some answers. And so we'll always have this idea of heroes. Although I agree with that part, forget the hero, forget the father, but it is really hard for humans to forget the father. The father is always there, even if they're a bad father.
I wanted to say Nelson Mandela was a bit of a bad father.
No, I'm not saying that.
No, but it was written about him. Kneo, what's his word? Steinberg's new book.
Right.
The Lovers, I think it's called.
He was a bad father.
He explains it so clearly to how terrible he was.
As a real father, he is not a great father, but that's it, yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Katerina. I'm originally from Ukraine, that's why maybe you a little bit suffer from my English. Sorry for that. Thank you so much for this event, for the exhibition, and for the nice talk. Here it's like a little bit local context. Yeah, we speak about what's happening inside of South Africa. But I would like to add maybe outside feeling to that, because for me personally as a Ukrainian here living in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and Steve Biko or Desmond Tutu, their voices for the world is still very loud and inspiring in our days, still stay on the right of human rights, of democracy, of rights to basic human values. Yeah. And as you say, just have your own home, sit at home and have a cup of coffee, have a chat with your family. But unfortunately, we live in a world
we see how many now war conflict around the world happening, and I think South Africa has a very strong voice, and also showing leadership how these conflicts to bring to the peace, especially on South African example. And I agree with you about family relationship and about the idea of father, but also I wouldn't forget, especially through the political perspective, that when we give too much power to one person, it's very dangerous that that person become a dictator, an authority, and we see countries who live under the authoritarian regime, the level of living for their citizens very poor. And I think events like this where people can discuss the ideas and share different point of views very important to develop this society. That's why thank you so much for this. I think voice of Nelson Mandela is very strong, not only in South Africa, but outside this South Africa as well, and inspiring millions of people to stay on the good side of this world, and really to stay human and help other human. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you want to have the finals, whatever is in your head about this? And thank you for this last comment, just to remind us that, you know, we should be insular. We should think about our neighbors and, you know, global events.
I'm going to be very terrible at this. I'm so sorry. I don't have like nice rounded hala at the end. But because I've been thinking about how there is this idea of I think, therefore I am. This kind of I am because I think I am. I execute myself and otherwise. And then, like you're describing, there is this idea of the self being co-created, as though there is one self and it has multiple embodiments. You know what I mean? Or to understand Ubuntu as I am made up of you. You know what I mean? Yeah, and I find that very useful, and that's what I want to say. And thank you for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you everybody for staying until at the end. Marika is going to do this, but for the space, for your presence, for Neo's artwork and thinking and just beauty. So thank you all. Marika, you want to conclude for us?
Thank you very, very much, Kopano and Kneo, for this wonderful conversation. And there are so many insights and so many things to think about further. And so thank you very, very much for this. I want to remind you about an event tomorrow, presented here in the same place by the center where I have another foot. Avrik will be here tomorrow afternoon at 12, where Nomonda Kilata and Siyapati Mlangeni will be in conversation with Sizonke Msimang and Tamar Garb. The body as archive, women as repository of history and memory, and then tomorrow evening, dance and music as political voice of repair with Gregory Makoma, the dancer, and Mandla Mlangeni, musician. So I think that those will be two very good events to attend as well. Thank you very much, and please extend the conversation at the back while you are having something to eat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me know. Let's talk.
Okay.